And then afterwards, after we introduce this, I kind of want to give a little heads up to, I think it was Abhishek. I had put your name down, and wasn't there? There was another student too who, was it Zachary? You guys had said you could take a look at Lumion um, at the end of class today. So just to, letting you know, if you're still up for that, I'd like to spend about 15-20 minutes with you showing. It's a slow, um, just 15-20 minutes at the end of class, then showing us what that interface looks like, and just how we would go about using it. So think about how we open it, how we export images, how do we add things to it, like all those basics for all of the software. It's kind of generally similar, but every interface is different, and if you can help us with that learning curve, that would be great. Okay, so let's get started here. All right, so we've been working in Rhino space most of the time, right? We've really just um, been thinking about what we're producing in here, and then I pull up my presentation, or I pull up the assignment, and I say, okay, here, do this. Um, and I was kind of thinking, for final, maybe I should. It'd be nice, since we have this time in our class schedule, to think about the post processing of that um, workflow, meaning thinking not thinking that the final image is just this, but also thinking about the other steps involved in making a good image. So it's not just a export, render, input, render into InDesign, I'm done. Though maybe sometimes if your image is that good, you don't need to post process, which is nice. Um, but sometimes it's not that way, and you want to adjust something or change something, or what have you. And that's when you have to understand that these images that we're getting from these other from Rhino especially, uh, can be just a reference image, and that we can create an image from those snips, right? So I'm going to first go through a kind of this reminder of how to get the snips from. Hopefully you guys all have gotten this from 3 weeks of working with these images, but just in case, I'm going to talk through how to export these in Enscape, how to export from V-Ray, and then I'll talk through these line drawings that I've done and how to export those from Rhino space. And then I'll talk through kind of the post-processing of these rendered images, okay, in Photoshop. Okay, so first things first, we're going to talk through a little bit of a reminder of how to take these off. Okay. And we'll turn off our site. Okay. So for Enscape, it's pretty easy, right? We just start our Enscape, make sure we have all of our sites on, all of our things modeled where we want them modeled. Um, and then we just let it run. I think kind of one thing that I noticed in my Photoshop world was I don't necessarily always want to have my background on, because sometimes if I'm not happy with the scene I've made in Enscape, I'd like a little more fluidity with what's happening in with that background. So I'd like to be able to place this in a Photoshop site and edit it that way. And in that way, I would just render this without the site turned on, and start to Photoshop in those elements instead. But since we spent so long building the site up, and I bet you've given it quite a lot of effort, we'll look at how we're just going to edit the sky background and not so much the ground and trees. Okay. You can see I did some addition to this, right? So I started to look at what sort of thing I could add to the tiny house. I have to admit it's not that easy, especially when you've already made so much of the building. But so I had to get a little creative, and I made some tessellation that is supposed to be responsive to the sun and to temperature. So it's supposed to be heat responsive as well. Um, okay, so you can see in my render that I'd showed that I changed my view, right? The view that I had set up from my previous renders. I had set up one before that was a side view, right? This guy. I'd set up one that was a front view. It was this guy. But neither of them. This one shows the addition, right? But it's kind of far away, and it's not really. It's still more about the house being in the site rather than the thing that I've modeled and designed that I want people to pay attention to. So I think if you've changed, if you've added this parametric design to your tiny house and you have these views set up, you might want to think about doing the same thing, which is adjusting that view so that it is more about your parametric design and less about the tiny house that it's on. I mean, I think it's still you're still going to need to dimension but that house, but that's just because of those are the dimensions that we're now arraying this solar responsive screen on, right? So um, it's not as it's more like the site context, right? And it's just supporting your design. Okay, so but I had to reorient the camera both externally and internally. I think you saw that in this thing, right? I was first facing the exact opposite direction. I was pointing the view out and looking at the lake and the water. But with the addition of my punch through skylight, which I'm certain is going to leak, but still it helps me to show off the screening internally. So I wanted to show both the the ceiling punch and I wanted to show that reflection on the wall. So I had to reorient my camera and start to try to make that the focal point of the image, right? How is that going to feel with about the space? So I imagined a kind of circle here that was going to act as my giant focal point, and then draw your eye up to the light. Okay, so once I did those, then I went back and I kind of said, okay, so now we're going to make sure that my visual settings are set correctly, right? So before you render, you're going to want to make sure that your outlines are maybe a little bit lower now because we had them turned up before. And that was so that we would show um, kind of a rougher sketch view, right? We were saying it's a low level of detail because we haven't figured out these things. However, now, now things are a little, oh, it's following my camera. I think I have this on. There we go. Because now that we've detailed things out, now that we've added furniture and materials and finishings and all that stuff, we don't want these black outlines to be too high, right? The sketch look is no longer sketchy, it's figured out. So we can start to pull those down a little bit. Maybe not all the way because it kind of gives a nice definition to where the surfaces start and stop, but we can pull that back a little bit. Okay. The other thing is we can also desaturate it here and start to kind of pull that back if we want. Um, and then adjust the sun brightness. I had it up a little higher because I was doing interior renders before. So, all these things you kind of want to go through a double check, make sure that all your settings are correct for the image that you're rendering. sun position, right, should be where we want the sun. Okay, and then we can go to the capture tab. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to choose the resolution Ultra 8D HD, right? You want to make sure you have this highest one. It should be more than sufficient for the size of your image um, for your board, right? So if you wanted to say do a huge um, image like this, Ultra HD should be just fine. Okay. The other thing that I wanted was I wanted to make sure that I'd had this image checked, this export object ID, material ID, and depth channel. What I want here is I want the material ID especially, so I needed to make sure that that was checked. And this is primarily for use of quick selection in Photoshop. So when I export something like that, it there we go. It exports a kind of wild image like this. Okay, there we go. It exports a kind of wild image like this, where there's a different color for each object in the scene. And then when I want to adjust something, I can do a quick selection of whatever that color is, and that will then allow me to apply, say, a material to that layer only, or to that location only. So, so I wanted to kind of make sure that I had that um, available to me, and that's, you know, Enscape's really nice because they offer that channel. Okay, so I want to make sure that I have that, and then I can go back to my Enscape. Where's my, made it too small and lost my Enscape capturing. There we go, Enscape capturing. Go to create a rendering, and now I can save my picture. Okay, so that's simple enough. Okay, and I'll do that for both my interior and exterior render. Now for V-Ray, if I go into V-Ray and I do the same thing here, I need to go to my settings, right, my settings tab here, and I need to go down to my render output here, and I need to make sure that my image width and height are appropriate in scale for wherever I'm saving this to. Okay, so these are in pixels, right? So you're going to want to make sure that you have this up to, you know, to a higher level than whatever this default is. You'll have to do some calculation. I forget which is which for pixels to inches. I'm going to say it's like, you can do a quick Google. Right, and depends on your DPI, what you want to aim for. So, right, 8x8 print if it's at 300 DPI. Yeah, it depends on what your end goal is. I had said 250 to 300 for your final image. So yeah, if you have, say, an image that's 20 inches wide, it's going to be 20 times 300. Maybe 250 you could get away with. So yeah, that's really big. Yeah, so you might want to play with this and get it to as low as possible for whatever you're going to. But by low as possible, I mean you don't want to make this too high, because if it's too high, it will take forever to render. So you kind of want to find the sweet spot of whatever the DPI that you're aiming for and the scale of your image is going to be. You know, so like for instance, this in this image I have here, yeah, this is set to, right now I have 52 inches in pixels. It says it's 3800. Okay, so 3800 by 2100. So I could set if I set that, if I set this to 2800 or 3800 or whatever, that would be that would export the same scale of image at the same resolution. But I would try then, because V-Ray is slower, to lower this, maybe 2500, and see if that lower resolution you can't get by with, honestly. Just because it takes, the larger the image in V-Ray, the larger or the longer it will take. And it could take you hours sometimes to run these production renders, production scale renders. Okay, so be careful, I guess, of this. Um, and I would love to show you, but lately this has been how my V-Ray has been rendering. So I don't know what I did. I think I must have broke it at some point. Um, Maybe it got mad because I was using Enscape too much. But this is this is how it's been rendering. So if I did render at 2500 DPI, I bet it would render black too. Maybe pretty quick. Yeah, it would. But you can see how it scaled the image up for me, and that this is how large the image is now going to be. Um, which is why we use these render regions, right? Because render region allows you to figure out these parts of your image, figure out the grass, figure out the trees, figure out your paneling or your concrete or whatever, but you can select those different parts of your image and then go forth with your big production render. Because you don't want to up these and then press production render, right? Remember, this is production render, this is interactive render. You usually have been working with this because it's quicker, it produces a lower res image. But if you press the production render, it's going to use, all powers that be to produce that production render to that image, that heightened width. So when that happens, you kind of, you're going to want to let your computer sit for a little bit and not do anything else, depending on your computer and of course your level of detail. But usually that's been my experience. So maybe focus on these a tinier aspect ratio first, right? So bring this down. Remember, I had it to like 800, I think, before, and then I made it even smaller for this because I was concerned of having so many programs open. But use these smaller aspect ratios first, figure it out, and then scale up and go for say 2500 across, and then hurry up and wait. Okay, so then once you have rendered this, and you should have something here and not black, then you're going to want to press save and save the current channel. And one other thing I think you should probably note is that your JPEG will save a flat JPEG, right, like this, like your actual rendered image, whereas a PNG will get rid of the background, so it will save without, it'll make your sky transparent. Just to note. And so if you're saving and you're wondering where your sky went, you might have saved it as a PNG. Okay, so that's rendering. That's kind of the guidelines for Enscape V-Ray. Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to talk about then was, so I have Enscape, those are my renders. I wanted to talk about exporting these line drawings from Rhino Space. Okay, there are a couple ways to do that. One, I had set up my Arctic view to just be line weight and poche. Okay, and then what I do is I take this image, and I take this image, it gives me the dimensions, the proportions. I can add dimensions to it, right? I can start to figure out the height of things and use this as a means of getting this information that I need to document, but I'm not actually going to use this as my image in my page. So by that I mean I will still export this image, okay, but I'm going to use it as a background reference. So view capture to file, remember? That's how we'll take a snippet of whatever is in our view portal. So I have my front setting. If I checked transparent background, I will get, I save it as a PNG, I'll get a transparent background. If I don't check this, I will get a white background with that, as I just using it as a front. It's just my reference for the dimensions and the locations of things. I just save it as a JPEG with a white background. Okay, so I did that for both my front view, my top view. I did the same thing. And this was, you know, this setting, this Arctic setting, it helps me to see the lines, so I can turn the curves on. Right under tools, options. Give a second. Under view, display modes, go to Arctic. So, oh yeah, I also turned my ground plane off so that that wouldn't oh, mess with my, maybe I must have also got rid of the ground. But I changed, all I did was to see these curves, I just changed my surface edge settings and I added 1. I gave it a dimension of 1 for the thickness of those lines. And that's really so I can see these things in a way. Okay, so I can see these things as I'm drawing over them in either Illustrator or InDesign or in Photoshop if I really wanted to. But the concept being that this is just my reference image, and then I'm going to add or control line weights and pochés in another program. Okay, so again, transparent. Okay. I can also, adjust the scale of that image too as I'm working with that. I could make it um, a larger image, right? I could scale this up and say I want it to twice the size. And this is going to be really about the size of the image we just looked at. So I don't necessarily need it to be that large because notice my drawings are only at the bottom portion of my page. They're not super large. So I think they're fine the way they are, especially because again, I'm going to draw over them. I don't necessarily care so long as I can see where the information is. Okay, so so that's how I got those images as my reference images. Another thing that you can do, and I think that might be you know important, and you saw me turn this off before, that was making a make 2D. Okay, so a line work um, drawing, like getting the line work from Rhino and then using that in sorry, not AutoCAD, in Illustrator to manipulate the line weights and draw, say, the diagrams or something. So I don't think we've actually talked about make to do, and I think a part of me always assumes that you've somehow just stumbled on it, but in case you haven't, it's a very useful command. So, for instance, here, what I did was I selected the geometry I wanted the two-dimensional line drawing of, and I typed in make 2D, let it auto-save. Okay, and then it gives me a prompt for 2D drawing options. This is usually appropriate, so I just click OK. Layer name, I'll call this my snowflakes. That's what my concept is. Okay, press enter. Okay, and then what it does is it creates, here you can see, a 2D line drawing of that geometry, right? And if I look at my side view, you can see that that is totally and completely flat, right? So that's nice because then what I can do is I can take this geometry, I can select it, and I can do File, Export Selected, and I can export this as a CAD drawing. You can also export as an Illustrator file. Illustrator here, yeah. But I honestly prefer CAD in case I I mean, sometimes I do bring it into CAD, so I think I just got into the habit of it. And Illustrator will also open a CAD file. So that's what I did. I created a CAD file and type blah blah blah. Just click save, and then it should prompt me. Yes, you'll want to export as polylines, 275 polylines. Okay, and then it exports that file, which I can then bring into Illustrator and start to change, adjust these line weights. Okay, if I want to, make, for instance, this patterning broader or maybe more intense, I could start to thicken these edge curves and then start to minimize these inner curves, right? So I could do that here, but it's, how do I say this? It's maybe more uh, universally done in Illustrator. So, meaning if somebody else is going to pick up the file, they'd probably expect there to be an Illustrator file and not some hidden geometry in Rhino. So, Illustrator kind of separates that task out and says, okay, now this is the diagram. We're going to start working the diagram, and then, you also might add pochets and other information. So, and you have a little bit more graphic control, right? So, that's up to you. I guess you could also adjust the line weights here, like I had shown you before, but if you didn't want to do that, this is another way of doing it. Okay, so I think that's about it. We did render exports, we did image exports, and we did line work exports. Okay, so that's Rhino space. So now that I have those images, what do I do with them? Well, I want to lay them out on the board, and I've worked back and forth really. I laid out this board. I kind of said I want my images to be of this scale, and then I made sure that when I exported those images that they were to that scale. Same thing with my line work, right? I kind of said, okay, so this is the space I have on my board. This is where I want these things to be, and now I need to figure out uh, what those images are from Rhino so that I can start to lay them out on my board. And I'm saying that without actually turning on the layer that I was using. So let's turn on my blocking layer. Okay, so this is what I'm kind of thinking you guys, this is a good exercise for you to do for this. Um, so, remember in the example I had for the year final, right? We had this board and it's kind of broken down, and I started to kind of group these diagrams, these deliverables, and I said, okay, so there's a location for here, and there's a location for this here, and then they're kind of the same scale, and you're breaking it down, right? You're starting to simplify what these images really are telling you, and this is kind of the reverse. This is building it back up, right? So if you think about what is due, what do you have to put on that board? And this is for our class and for studio final, of course, too. And anytime you have to create something like this, so um, it's kind of just a nice strategy to first block out your board and then start to fill in these spaces. So, for instance, for this one, I kind of thought, well, we spent so much time on renders, and I think they tell a lot about what the image is, and I think they could pull, some people across Crown Hall if I kind of highlight, the contrast of the yellow versus the black and white. So I'm talking about this guy, right? So I think I'd like them to be bigger, right? I want the exterior to be bigger, especially because this thing is really, it's like a roof system, so roofing system. So it's quite, striking on the outside of the building. And then the interior I'd like to also show because it just is almost as big because it's, affecting that interior space nicely, and it has good shadow and lighting. And now we can show that with these render programs. So I'd like my renders to be big. That's what I decided. You might have a different thought. Okay, so once I did that, I placed these. I didn't even place um, the gray on the board. I literally just placed the text, and I kind of drew a line. So I changed my view setting, right? So in InDesign, when you work with a file, you can change your view, right, from preview, which is what your image is going to look like, to normal. Okay, and normal is where you'll get to see the whole markup world behind it. And so what I did was I just pulled from over here. I pulled a guideline. I pulled a guideline and I said, okay, so I kind of want, and this was without anything on the board. And I said, this is kind of where I want my images to start and stop. I kind of want to think about, this then as my information side, right? And it's almost a little over a third of the distance. Um, so I want, this to be my information side with like all the information about my concept and then all of the information about my line drawings, right? The more detailed information of where it's actually applied to the building, right? So here I have just this is how my design works, but now here this is how it's applied and this is how it would work on a building. So and then over here this is more like this is how you're going to experience it and why you should buy it. So there we go, delete that. I need two of them. So that's all I did, right? I pulled this over and then I said I had two text boxes here and there. And I said, okay, so this is where those renders are going to be. And then I thought about, blocking this area out and blocking this area out because they kind of act as two separate um, discussion points. First part is going to be the introduction where I have my title. It's going to be clear and big. So here, right, clear and vague. I have my title, and I'm going to say kind of a little disclaimer about what exactly that is, because honestly, snowflakes, it just sounds super abstract. So what is that? Why is that there? And then I always usually like to have another sort of a introduction sentence where it's just kind of like this is what this is and why it is and where it is. And so I say where the thing is and I say what it's doing and why is it special. Um, and then ideally the rest of my images support that message. So um, and this is true, like I said, for any board you put together, because you want to kind of think about how you're going to introduce your topic and then make sure that topic is kind of a one. I guess sometimes there are a couple of points to make, aren't there? But um, usually the strongest designs and concepts, they have just this one really strong notion, and then everything else follows from that. And it's kind of like I think of like writing a paper where you have this thesis or you have this one point that you're trying to like drill in to the other person's mind, and you're using, instead of words, we're using images. So, just like an essay, you have the introduction, you have kind of like, this is what this is all about, this is what I'm going to try to prove. And then now we have our theory, right? This is the theory that is going to be proven. This is how that theory works. And then this is how that theory is applied, right? So this is kind of like the body of the rest of your essay, saying like, okay, so this is the whole story of this design. So hopefully, if you think about it, like you're trying to write an essay and you're trying to argue a point, uh, it, maybe it's a little bit clearer or helps you focus more, I guess, on what your subject is. Um, I just don't want to see uh, your final board in only your tiny house, right? It should not be your studio project. It's in there to only be a context for your parametric design. Okay, and if it's not context for your parametric design, maybe you have another context. Like for instance, there's a student in the early morning class who has a Martian landscape, and he just made this Martian house thing, and it has nothing to do with his tiny house. It's just his Martian house. And he made up a whole story behind it, and he started to get, uh, kind of wild and whatever, and that's perfectly fine because it's kind of it's a very strong concept, right? It's a house on Mars, and it's a pavilion on Mars, really. And now he gets to kind of use these images to support uh, what that house is or what that design is. Um, so you just kind of have to think about what exactly is it that you're designing. If it's supposed to be a pavilion, where is that pavilion? What is the purpose of it? Is it next to like a super tall structure that's, this is like the area of respite? Um, is it out in the field somewhere? Is it supposed to be like a park pavilion? Um, what how are we supposed to interact with it, and maybe relating it to something we already know is a strong approach, right? Because like I'm going back to the Mars thing, because if we all kind of have a general, like if you say a house on Mars, you kind of start to think of these sort of Star Trekky or sci-fi uh, structures. And when you're designing with that sort of cultural knowledge in mind, you can use it, right? You can use what is our fantasy world of the Martian landscape to your advantage, and start to kind of bring that information into your design and into your images. So, anyways, I kind of went off the rails, didn't I? Sorry, I do that. Last time, I swear, because today's the last day. Okay, so what I did here was I kind of I started to bring in these renders, right? So I placed my original render. Okay, so Control D, right? In case you don't know that. So once I laid everything out, I select the image box that I made, right? So you go over here, you create an image box like so, and then by selecting that image box with your black cursor here, you can do Control D to place an image. So I had originally um, this colored image, full color image in place of it. This was directly what I got from Enscape. Same with this here. This is directly from Enscape. There was no photoshopping for either of these images. And then for these, I started to place these snippets that I took from also my Rhino space, right? So it was these images, and I just took them from my Arctic setting, and I exported this image, okay? Because those are my three iterations. I'm saying the thing that can change about this is you can buy them in three different scales and array them, in whatever array you want to. But the scale is what matters. Okay. So then I placed those images here, and then of course I started to infill the rest of it. But none of these images, in my mind, none of these images are finished. They're not final images. They're placeholders for me to then work through them and edit them and add information after I've placed them. Okay, so I sometimes think that that's a strong fallacy um, the in any community, really, is that you're supposed to only work in one program, and from that program I get a good enough image, so I'm just going to place that image here and now I'm done. um, I guess if it's good enough, um, you can get away with that, but that's not always the case, and you should really have a critical eye when you're placing these things and go back and take a look at what exactly that image is. So for instance, if I view screen performance high quality. Okay, so if I take a look at this image, um, the line weight, the line work really is generally not that good, right? They're all the same line weight. There's no hierarchy. The yellow is convoluted. I can't tell what exactly this is. Is it supposed to be lines across the building, or is there supposed to be some solid parts? I mean, in the renders and images, these things look solid, but in the plan, it looks like it's all like a net. So I don't think it's just not reading right. And as exciting as the yellow dimensions are, they're upside down because of the orientation of the image. And then they're crossing over my geometry, which is also not good. If I do that, I need to do that with a purpose. So you know there there's this second part of kind of looking over the image that you got from, Rhino, uh, or even after you photoshopped it, bringing it into here and starting to analyze what more needs to be done to it. For instance, there's no scale, there's no north arrow, there's no, you know, uh, I don't know, there's no site context. This site context image that's here is actually different. It's different in nature in relation to these other images, right? I would think that if this is going to be all line work, that you would want this to also be line work. So, to me, I would want to keep going with this. I want to adjust these settings and make and start to draw over them. So I could use, for instance, I could start to apply, lock these layers, and we can start to use the tools in InDesign even to oh, it's not on. I see. Okay. Okay. I can use the tools in InDesign, for instance, to say to add those line weights. And by that I mean they don't have you can use them as a guide, right? So the whole point is that you get a final image that reads appropriately. So it doesn't necessarily have to be exact to the T. We're not, this is, and I think I just actually had to tell this to a girl at work because she was spending so much time um, detailing the the concept page. She was concerned about what the dimensions are and what, whether or not these lines were accurate. Um, this these kind of boards, we are not building off of these boards. It is, do not mistake me, it is imperative that you get your dimensions correctly um, in the construction documents. So when we are putting this into Revit, or if we're drawing this in AutoCAD, if we're going to be putting this in any sort of documentation that is going to be a suggestion of building, then yes, those lines need to be absolutely accurate. But for something like this, for a concept page, okay, nobody's going to measure that. They want a general idea of how big things are. We need a general idea because we, you know, we who are going to view it, who are going to kind of make these further decisions as to if we're going to build it. Um, we need to know, what that scale kind of is because that every every foot costs more money, or yeah, every foot costs more. So that's kind of why they're there. It's also telling us the extents of the design, right, and how big these things are going to be. It's giving us an idea of first impression of what that scale is. So you're allowed some general wiggle room. Okay, so it can't be totally off, but you have, I would say, like 5% accuracy discrepancy, meaning you can adjust these lines and they can be a little off so long as the overall image reads accurate. Okay, so you can take these lines and you can start to adjust them. You just want to make sure that they're legible, they're clean, that the design intent is there, so that we understand it. Okay. So I don't know. Does that? I hope that makes sense. I definitely don't want to be the person who tells you to be sloppy. That is not what I'm trying to say. But I do think that sometimes there's a lot of time wasted in um, in making sure that the dimensions are true to form, rather than just making sure that the dimensions are, like 99% accurate, and even sometimes, for instance, if it's 6 foot and 1 1/4 inch, just make it 6 and 1 inch. We don't care about the quarter inch. They'll rough it anyways. Like when they install this, when the thing is built, uh, that quarter inch, it's not going to be built to that. There's going to be some margin of error, and and that's known. Everybody knows that. So you can just make it 6 foot and in 1 inch, right? You want to make sure that you kind of have that understanding. Same thing for over here. I have 3 3/4 inch. I would just make that 22 foot and 4 inches. right? I would get rid of most of the fractions unless it's like, um, maybe if it's off by a total half a half an inch. So if it's 11 foot 8.5, I would keep the half inch there since a half inch is kind of, now we're talking an actual dimension, but a quarter inch is within tolerance. Okay, so just I hope that's helping you to kind of speed up your process and not, you know, not slow you down, which I think sometimes these line drawings are a little intimidating to do. So the other cool thing is you can start to, crochet these things too. So I think we've done that before where we had the pen tool. And then we go in here and we can start uh, to draw over this. We can give them, control the line weights and start to, here you'd want to be a little bit more accurate than this. You can also go into Illustrator and take that line drawing we had and manipulate these things there, right? You don't need to do this um, in InDesign. However, it's nice. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. However, it is a nice that it's in the same program. Okay, so if it's I want to add some shading, okay, so now I've added some shading, and I can start to maybe array these. Um, so just to kind of to get you thinking about what you're going to do with your line weights. Okay, so that's kind of my notion for these over here that I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit them. The other thing I'm going to edit is going to be the photoshopped image, or sorry, the renders, right? I'm going to Photoshop them. So what I want to do is I want to, yeah, I wanted to Photoshop this one, and I wanted to focus I wanted to make sure the image focused more on the yellow. I wanted to focus on the design and have the rest of it be a kind of supporting context for the design, but for it not to be, for there to be less distraction. I feel like the green is really distracting me from what is the yellow, right? It's complementary, yeah, but it's I think the scene might be a little distracting. So in that way, I went into Photoshop and okay, that was from this morning. So I went into Photoshop and I did File, I did Open, and I pulled up that render that I had. Okay, Open. All right, and it made this nice large image, right? If I right click on the measuring, I can see what it is in inches. Okay, so it's very large. Like I said, it's more than enough when it exports as Ultra HD. Um, okay, so I thought, well, maybe I will first get rid of the background, right? So in this one, I changed out the background for another kind of background. Um, I think I would still, like I said, I wanted to redo the site, but I don't think wasn't time. So so to get rid of the background, I also placed what I was talking about was that object. Nope, there we go. Material ID. There we go. Material ID. And with that placed, okay. With that placed, now I can create a kind of, I can use this black sky as my clipping mask. So so if I go to select, I go to color range, and I can use my color selector tool, right? And it, excuse me, it will select anything that is within the range of black. Okay, so the fuzziness control will allow me to extend that range further beyond just black. Okay, right now this is selecting all of the black pixels, and you can see that in this selection image here. As I start to increase that, you can see it's starting to grab um, more areas, and those other areas are kind of, they're within the range of that pure black. Okay, that original color that I selected. But then if you move it too much, you can see how it's starting to select these other colors that are also close to, they're darker, right? So they have more black in that color. So if I start to pull this back, now we get now we get that enough of these um, little nooks, the little bits that are in between the trees. We should get most of those where it intercepts the green, and then some, only some of this lake, which we can take care of. Okay, so it's going to select all of those black areas. Okay, if I hold Alt, you can see there's a little minus sign that comes up, and that will help me. I can deselect things then. Okay, so I can just select, I can remove those other, dark areas from my overall selection. Okay, I'm going to do another layer here, and then what I can do is I can use this for later. So if I use black paint and I just select this, now with that, come on, there we go. Okay, now with that under layer, deselected off, I will still always have this kind of quick selection for later if I want to adjust these things. I'm not sure I necessarily need to, but I'm now able to go back to my original layer where I can create that clipping mask. So if I do Control Shift I will invert my original selection. So this is now going to select everything that is not the sky and not the background. Okay. And now I'll go over to my background. I'll go down to this little icon here. Looks like a flag or something, circle in it. And that was going to create a mask for that original image. Okay. And anything that wasn't selected is going to be masked. It's not deleted, it's just covered over. So if I right click on that mask, I can do disable mask and it comes back online. I can also right click and do enable mask and then it goes away again. And this allows me to place another image in. So I'm going to file, place, and then I went on Google, right? And let's change this up. I'm tired of scene one. We'll do scene two. Okay, so I'm placing a new image in. Okay, I need to scale this image. It's probably going to come out pretty small. I think in your Creative Cloud, you're able to scale this with no problem. Oh, that's why I didn't use, look at those watermarks. Fine. Okay, don't place. Fine, I'll go back to scene one. Okay. All right, so it's tiny. So if I scale this up, in my version, my CS6 version, it's very old school. It's the last version of Photoshop and InDesign of Adobe really that you could buy one-off versions of, and them not charge you all the time, right? I just bought a license forever, and yeah, it used to be like that. And now you have to buy the Creative Cloud and keep paying for the rest of your life. So the problem with this, of course, is that you don't get any of the upgrades. So as I'm scaling this image, I have to hold Shift to keep that aspect ratio. If I don't hold Shift, it goes wild. I think for yours it's inverted. So you should be able to just scale it and there's no problem. And if you wanted to change the ratio, you can hold Shift. Okay, so move this up maybe a little bit more. And I have the feeling of there being more mountains in the distance. Okay, so once I get my scene in there and I kind of, maybe I would start to play with this background scene a little bit more. I don't know, it's a little weird, the coloring between the grass and the, it's also, this is so cartoony and then this is so realistic. I'm not sold on it, but it is what it is. So um, I think the black and white will help. The other thing I did for Photoshop World, and another, I think it's a cool trick for you guys to have in your back pocket, is to be able to switch out textures. Okay, so you see here I had originally brick texture in Rhino, and then I thought once I got in here, I was like, no, I don't want that. I want it to be wood. Okay, well, I'm not going to go back and re-render and remodel and all that. I could, but if I don't have time and I just want to quickly get it in, I can add a new group, call it whatever texture I want, and then find that texture online. Of course, Google some texture that you were going to have to do anyways if you mapped it appropriately. and then go back into, I have to go back a few weeks. There we go, that cherry texture. Okay, place. Oh, you didn't go in. Fine. Okay. So, all right, so it's not totally placed yet. I still have some manipulation I can do, which is I want to rotate it. So I have to hold shift to rotate 90 degrees. I'm going to zoom in, control plus, okay. And then I'm going to align it with the edge of my house. Hold shift, kind of scale it up to something appropriate. Right click that image, choose distort, and then pull those endpoints to align with my base geometry. Okay. All right, and the cool thing is we're actually going to create a masking layer for this. So if we want to fix this, you know, the way that we've tiled it, whatever, we're not going to delete anything of it. We're going to leave that as it is and just apply an under mask. So here again, I need to go back. I need to do this again for this other side. Again, hold shift to scale these things up. Right click, distort. Here again, I want to connect my points, connect the dots, right, to the limits of my geometry, base geometry. Okay, I think that's about good. Like I said, we'll fix that after we mask it. So place that. Now right click, I'll duplicate that layer because it's in the same orientation. That copy, can shift it up, right click, Control T, right click, distort, and adjust this again. Okay, I'll go back and fix it after, but should be generally accurate. Okay. All right, whatever. We'll fix it afterwards. Okay, so I have my wood texture. Doesn't it look beautiful? I know. So I'm going to hold shift and select all these layers, place that into the wood texture category, and now I can turn those off and on. Awesome. Okay. So the next thing I want to do then is I need to create that under that mask. Okay. So the thing that it's going to mask over, and that's going to be this yellow area that was my brick. So I'm going to use my magic wand tool selector, select, I have to be on that layer. Okay, and now I'm going to select what is that pea yellowy color thing. Okay, under my wood texture, I'm going to create a new layer. Okay, new layer here. Bring this layer down below all of the other layers. Okay, he has to be the very bottom, but still in that group. And then I can turn this off. Go over to my bucket, my paint bucket, and then fill that in. Okay, I'm not seeing anything because I have that layer off. Okay, but if I turn off my cherry texture, that little paint bucket tool now made my house look like this. Again, beautiful, I know. Okay, so once I have that placed in there, what I can do is I can select these three layers, holding shift, right, to select all three, and then I'll do Control Alt G. And what that's going to do, it's going to use this bottom layer as the clipping mask. Okay, so that these are all just going to, if I wanted to move these, for instance, I'm use this move tool, it's just going to keep that texture at the same ratio, um, or whatever, you know, I had it as, uh, or allow me to manipulate it in other ways. Okay, um, but it's going to let me have some sort of freedom with that texture because I didn't delete it, right? I didn't want to delete it, any of the texture. So I did Control Alt G. Okay. Um, so so that's kind of nice. That's why I like that texture placement technique because it has that. You know, I can go back and start to adjust these textures and distort them again to get them to the right locations. Um, So, but the thing is because I had brick underneath, right? So my original thing is brick. Um, the other trick that's really nice is if it's clay, if it's a white clay matte, no original texture, then I can select this bottom layer, right? I can select this masking layer, siding mask, um, and I can select from this down thing and go to multiply. And multiply will pick up all of the under shadows. Okay, so notice how we're now seeing the shadows of the roof, the back shadow. It's we're starting to see the edging. It just makes it look a lot more real, right? And but I have my brick there, and it's kind of giving me now a weird uh, mix of the two. It looks like I have some like brick indented siding or something, like I don't know, some strange coarse pattern. So multiplying this for me doesn't work. I have to change it back to normal. Oh, look at my edges need. Oh, well, I have to go back to normal, and then I have to start to pull this back about as far as I can, which is 80 something, so that I can start to pick up those shadows, but not pick up too much of the brick. Okay. All right, so I can kind of get the shading in, and then I'm going to have to make up my own shadows. So which isn't so bad. Okay. So we just need to create a new layer. Okay, and I'll call this shadows 1 or something. Um, and then this is also the shadows is going to need to be, I need to make it an overlay layer first with a lower opacity. Okay, and then I'm going to take my paintbrush tool, change that scale, yeah, 250. Okay, that's good. I could also change the opacity here, but I'd rather change it overall. Okay, so I'm going to leave that opacity where it is, and then start to, oh, one thing I need to do is I need to select. I need to use my quick select. So I actually have to select that layer mask so that it works only within the limits of that area, right? I don't want the shading to occur anywhere else or on any other geometry. I just want it to be on that siding we just added. So I'm going to go back to my paintbrush now and overlay. Okay, so now I can start to fill this in, and I could even use my bottom layer as a guide. But I do know that this side of my house is all in shadow. Okay, and then so is my roof eave. Okay, so I know generally that shadow is there. Okay, so now I can deselect that. I could probably select the roof edge to up there and delete that, right? So there's a crisp, clear edge of this. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so my my wood's a little bit richer and darker than the original. So one thing I can do is I can right click this layer, duplicate shadows copy. All right, change that to normal and then adjust that opacity. Right, so now I can compare the two. The thing about the overlay layer is it makes the darker colors a little bit richer. So you can sometimes go to soft light if it's a little too rich. Okay, but if we compare the two, that looks fairly accurate. Yeah, okay. All right, so that's wood texture application, and you could do that, of course, with brick or with any other textures with your, you know, grass and whatever else. It's just a matter of, making sure you have your mask appropriately, placed so that it's not overlapping any weird geometry or overhanging anything or whatever. You just want to make sure your mask is where it is supposed to be, and then your texture needs to be aligned to the geometry that you're applying it to. Right? You don't want some weird rotation or distortion, right? If this isn't following the perspective line, it's going to look weird. and then making sure you have your lighting and shadows also attuned to whatever your time of day and location is. All right, so that's wood texture. What was the other thing I was going to? Oh, right, the black and white mask. Okay, so to create that, sorry, to create that black and white mask here, right? So I just masked the surrounding area, and then I said, okay, I want my yellow to be the total focus, and then this is just context. So we're going to do the same thing here. Again, I created another group for this. I'm not sure I totally needed to because it only really is um, one layer, but that's okay. We're just going to be super diligent. So I need to turn this material ID back on. Okay, and I go back over to my wand tool and I selected my, I had to hold shift to select, to add to my selection. Okay, and I just went around and I selected all of those, um, little triangle things that are my parametric design. Okay, once I got those figured out, then I went back up to my mask layer and I selected hue saturation. Okay, turn that layer off. And then in that hue saturation um, interface, the properties, I just pulled the slider back down. Oh, I should have inversed my selection. Look at that, I'm making them white. Oh, I bet I can make them, yeah, multiple colors. There we go, that's fun. Maybe I'll keep it like that. I kind of like it. We'll do a magenta. Okay, so now I gotta go back and reselect those things. This is why you should save the selection, uh, which was like we did before, right? Here we made this other layer that we could do quick select, but now I have to go back and hold shift, add to my selection. That's what happens. Okay. All right, so now I have to do Control Shift Inverse to grab the outside of this, and then I can go back to that black and white mask and select hue saturation, and now I should be able to desaturate everything. There we go. You can see that it inverted the selection. Okay, now I get even lighten it a little bit. But now it shouldn't matter if we, oh, I bet because, right, okay. So, so that's pretty simple, I think. Oops, kind of curious as to what other colors I could play with. Ooh, that's kind of fun. Anyway, so once I get that, I have my, right, I have my wood texture, my black and white mask. The other thing I was playing with was adding highlights and shadows to the overall. So in that in that world that's thinking, if I want to focus the your eyes on this even more, what I can do is I can do what we just did with the wood texture, right? So I created these shadow layers, but I can also do the same thing for just the whole image itself, and I can add shadows. I can also create another layer and call that highlights, and it kind of allows me to have some uh, artistic control, we'll say, over where those things occur. So I'm going to change both of them to overlay. Could also be soft light if I want, to not pick up as much color. Um, and I can pull those down to save some opacity. We can change this afterwards. Okay, but on my shadows layer, what I'll do is I'll use my paintbrush and my black color to what I was describing in the earlier class um, was I drew a kind of imaginary line or imaginary curve about the back of the building, right? Because my sun's coming from this direction, and I wanted it to highlight the center of my image, and I wanted to say this is what I want to focus on. So if I have the center, the design at the crosshairs of my white side and my black side, then I kind of get this focal point between the two, and that which is the roof. Okay, so and then I just turn that down. So in my shadows layer here, for instance, I can start with really far, really, whew, that's really dark. Let's just turn that down a little bit more, and maybe make it a little bit larger too, so it's not so, that's better. Okay, we want a little bit more freedom with our, okay, there we go. So if we bring that down, okay, that's my shadows, and my highlights is going to be, let's go over here, we'll select this, change the color to white. Okay, we have white and black, we can switch between the two now. And now on my highlights layer, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Right? I want that to be kind of at the midpoint of the two. It's okay if the light kind of starts to blend up the field, but it's going to, you know, so don't want it to overtake. Here we go, the image. All right. And if I pull this back a little bit more, right, turn it off, we'll see the original image. This one, my highlights might be a little too much. But it's just kind of a nice way to trick people into focusing more on your design. You can also start to add more shadows if you wanted to your geometry itself. So you can do that using this kind of tool, or you can also use your burn tool here. So, oh, burn here, sorry, burn or dodge, and that will also add some darkness to your building. Okay, I'm actually not going to do it because lately I've been, if I use either of these, my computer crashes. So I'm gonna just hold off and we'll do it the old-fashioned way, which is you select your paintbrush and scale this down a little bit. But that you can then add, if you want some more shading to your ground here or underneath your porch, you can start to kind of adjust where those shadows happen, right? Or in the building again, like you were adjusting for the wood. Hopefully you're a little more careful with these than I'm being. Can also start to look dirty, so be careful. And then in the white highlights, we can do the same thing. Sometimes it helps to just add a little bit of uh, the highlights to your, uh, like to the design itself. So you can kind of give it a little bit more brightness to that one location, and then the rest of the image should kind of fall away. All right, so that's kind of all I had for you for Photoshop and InDesign today. It was just kind of, basic tricks that um, hopefully will help you as you're working through these things. I know it's not easy. Update your images right after you've worked on them, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Um, I wonder if maybe I shouldn't show you how to start a file here. I'm assuming I like, yeah, of course new file, new document. Um, but to create your board at this scale, what you'll do is you'll go to new document, and then you're going to um, adjust this page size to custom. Okay, and then you can type in directly whatever width you want. So ours is 48 inches, so I typed in 48 and then space IN, and then height. I typed in 36 space IN, and I named it 48 by 36, right? And I clicked OK. All right, then that's my my new custom preset, but I can also save this. So if I want to use this in the future, I can, like the same 48 by 36 inch board, I can click save preset and then give this some name like DC3 final board. Or if you just want to save it as 36 by 48 inch board, you also have that option. Uh, one thing you might want to note is since we're working at a much larger scale than normal, um, you're going to want to probably adjust your margins. So I have this one set at 10 for all of these, and if this is selected, it should be locked. All of your margins should update to the same distance, right? So that when you click OK and you create this, um, you'll get this sort of image, right, to work from, this board to work from. So if we right click the top and we change this to inches, we can see that, yep, it's 48 inches. You have to right click this one, inches. Okay, it's 36. Now, you want to go over and make sure you change your layers. So I had mine set up so I had a reference layer, right? Okay, then I added layers. I called it images. I had another layer. I called it text, and another layer. I called it graphics. And those are usually my standard layers. And what that allows me to do is what I was just showing you, right? So I have my blocking layer where this is the layer where I can quickly select things, adjust them, right? I'm working with, you know, a, it's almost like these other layers don't exist. And then I can start to move these around and, there's some freedom because I'm not trying to work about over any other information. Then if I don't want to see that, I turn on these, I can just turn on my images layer, make sure that all my images are checked off, right? And then I can also turn on my text layer separately, make sure that I have labels on everything, which doesn't look like I do. So I might want to go back and check where those labels are. Oh, I had one white on white, so I'm not going to see it. Okay. And then same thing here, I'd want to go through and I want to make sure that I have all of these dimensions where I want them. And then graphics, right? So actually this should be on my graphics layer. It's on my text layer, I think, but it was a graphic that I made for this, right? So that when I'm working, I know that that is different from these other images that I have on my page, right? The graphic means that the graphic itself exists in InDesign. It's not another image that is a reference, right? So if I go to my links, these are all of my references, right? Images that are coming from other locations, other folders. This is, this exterior Photoshop image. This is this interior image, but this has no reference image. This isn't linked. This is something that I've drawn um, in InDesign that I'm using as my kind of graphic tool right now. Okay, so um, so yeah, I think the one other thing to note is that once you make this margin, once you kind of decide that that's the limit, and you keep working with your normal view on, you want to make sure you don't break that boarding. Okay, so that's kind of a presentation no is that once you've, oh, except for you can't see it, but it should be that all of your images, all of your text, so I'm breaking it there, all of your text should follow within that border because once you start to shift it outside of it, okay, so for instance like this, and we turn back on our preview, it just looks wrong, right? It looks like you accidentally did that. It looks sloppy. And if it looks sloppy, then I don't know if I trust you to build my house. So you want to make sure that you just kind of have those very simple, right? It's like takes 2 seconds to make sure that everything is aligned, that everything's labeled, and that all your deliverables are on your page. And then you can start to get fancy, right? So before we go to break and go to other programs, so I to Lumion, um, I did kind of want to show you, I found a kind of another page, right, that was guideline page, tons of these, but I don't know, I liked that they broke it down into these simple tips kind of help guide you through your layouts and how you're going to how you're supposed to attack one of these boards because they are huge and they're kind of overwhelming because you have a lot of space. But you have to remember that all that space, right? This 36 by 48 inches. You think about that's 3 by 4 feet. Um, this image is going to be huge. It's like a poster all on its own. So you want to be sure that it's showing you something important. Um, so hierarchy I think is one key thing they talk about, as well as the overall board size, of course, and then a layout, right? So how these things are related, keeping that border, keeping space in between your images, having some negative space to allow your board to breathe, right? You don't want to overdo it and have just all images. You want to have some spacing to them, also some logic, right? So this is the exact same thing we just showed you, which was kind of do some sort of markup. And you don't have to do it in InDesign. I prefer InDesign because I know InDesign. I like InDesign. But if you don't know InDesign, you could do this on a piece of paper. I've done that before too, where you just sketch it out and you start to figure out where things are going to go, what story you're going to tell. And yes, typically it's, project title, concept, and then, all of these sort of more detailed items and then pretty renders. But it's up to you how you're telling these things. Um, I also liked that they talked about background here. So it talks about it says white backgrounds are best because they show the true colors of your project, and that is I totally agree with that because once you make everything black or everything gray or everything pink, that kind of the renders and all of your other images kind of have to follow that logic, and maybe we lose some material um, information. Um, However, it is supposed to be conceptual uh, presentation, so I think there's wiggle room there. I think there's an argument to be said that if it looks like you can still hold true to the design itself, but you can also have some creative graphic fun with it to to engage with the project, right? So you just have to think about that. If you do black, then maybe your line weights need to be a little bit stronger. You're now dealing with a lighter grayscale, right? Because if you go too dark, that gray is going to go right into the background. You're not going to see it. Um, Unless it's like this where it starts to flow through with your site plan. But just if you're going to get that fancy. Colors, I thought it was also pretty good. You can do a black and white, right? Which isn't it can be it can be very strong. It can also, kind of be slightly boring or sad even. So, adding a little bit of color it never hurts. Just want to control it right where that color is. So if your building is actually that color, if your product is actually that color, then you'll want to show that. If it's not, then maybe you want to show it more in the diagrams and more in other ways, right? So in font or graphics or is in sky. I thought that was really fun. They chose like 4 or 5 different colors from the same color palette and then started to play with them and their use of them, but still kind of keeping the black and white background and the black and white plan with color swatches. And this one I of course really like just because it's really one color, right? It's yellow. And then we have these kind of complementary colors, but it's mostly the yellow that we're supposed to focus on, which I thought was really nice because in that yellow, you see that in the render, and then you see that in diagram, and you can connect the two really clearly. Okay, image hierarchy. I think this one actually shows it better. This is like black and white contrast color, which is very strong, but tricky to get away with because again, all black background. So I thought this one was really nice because the section perspective, yeah, that big beautiful section perspective, you almost don't need, all these other things are just kind of support for this image because this is so engaging and it tells you so much about how that space is used, what materials are there, what time of day, what location, how it works in context, how people are using it. Just there's so much about a section perspective that can tell you about your building. Um, So if you want to go for the extra credit, I think you should. Um, that's a good example. And it's also nice because you can use it to weight the page, right? You can bring that down at the bottom of the page, do full bleed edge, and then you have this nice negative space to also act um, as your the rest of your page, right? So you want a third and two thirds. Yeah. So anyways, I'll forward this email. I'll forward this in an email with the rest of, whatever else we've talked about today. Um, and that is that's pretty much it. I think we are done for the semester. Um, I think we'll take a break, or that was the end of class, I guess, for the semester. But I think we'll take a break, and we will. So let's say like 3:45, and then we'll come back, and then if Abhishek, I had asked you to maybe show us some Lumion. Are you still uh up for that? Are you able to kind of walk us through how to use it? I'm not hearing. Are you talking? Because I'm not hearing you. Yes, and that you're talking, or yes, that you can present. Um, Otherwise, mic not working. Okay. Um, oh no. Okay. All right. No, that's okay. Let's see. There was somebody else that was also had it, but I don't want to put anybody on the spot either. Well, because I'm thinking that the morning class, Anthony uh, Tuman, he did a tutorial for that class. So, and I taped it, so I could also just put that on YouTube. I could separate that out and put that on YouTube because I actually think that this was a, the better of the two classes. I actually remembered to cover a couple of things I forgot for them. So how about I'll do that? I'll take a snip of I'll take that snip of Anthony's tutorial and then put that online, and then we'll we'll put this class from today up there for you. Okay. All right. Well, then I guess that is it. Then we don't need a break. Um, are there any questions? Any questions about the final? Um, the the boards. I'll send out a link, of course, to next week's final presentation class. There, we don't have an invite yet, so I'll send out an invite for that and for the in-person final. And then the boards for you guys who are printing, um, you're going to, you can still use, they have the plotters at school working. So you should be able to plot there in person. So you'll have to go to the computer lab and actually plot sometime, I would suggest next week. So for instance, if we're looking at the calendar, you're supposed to present on the 8th. um, you could try to plot up until the Monday the 7th, but I honestly think that if you get it done by uh, yeah, but you're gonna want to work over the weekend, I bet. Yeah, then I guess your best bet is to plot on Monday, and you could even have the morning then too on the 8th to try to make sure you have it plotted. Okay, yeah. I guess then aim for the end of day on the 7th to make sure you have your plot ready to pin up on the 8th. And then if you absolutely need to, you have that morning still on the 8th to plot. Um, just thinking because there's some students in my morning section that will need to plot, and then there are also students from Peluso's courses that need to use a plotter as well. So I don't want you to have to fight for a machine, but I think it should be fine. Okay, just kind of keep that in mind. Note that there might be a line. Um, yeah, okay. Um, then I guess that's it. I'll send out an email after those courses are uploaded or the classes from today are uploaded to YouTube and any other helpful links. Otherwise, I will see you next week for finals. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you get some break in between now and next week. Okay, I'm waving. Bye. Happy Thanksgiving. Of course, yeah, no problem, Abhishek. I'm here. Oh, let me stop my recording then.